Hello and welcome to the second episode of Grim Reviews. Today we're not going to be talking about a specific game in general. We're going to be talking about uh, game types. So as you get more into board games and playing board games and things like that, you're going to start hearing common words that reference certain types of games. Not like specific games, but the way that the game plays. You'll know most of these already, just from basic playing in board games and things like that. You have Risk, which is, a strategy game. You got Monopoly, which does have strategy, but there's a lot of luck based in that. You got the game of life, the old school ones uh, that you're used to. But as you get more into, the renaissance, if you will, of board games that are coming out now, there are certain groupings of board games that you might hear people talking about. So today we're going to get into and talk about a few of those. I'll explain just a little bit about how I feel about some of the ones that I have in my collection personally, and some of the ones that I don't have a lot of in my collection, and kind of just go over what those game types mean exactly. So you know what you're getting into if somebody references a game of that type, or if that type of game sounds fun to you. Uh, the words that you could use to look it up. So we have our selection of games right here that I will use as examples, but there won't be any like rule. We won't go into rules of any of the specific games or anything of that nature. This will be more of a helping video later on down the line when I start going into more in depth of my board game reviews and start talking about different board games, and you'll hear these keywords and phrases, and then you'll know what they mean now. So let's get right into that. The first game type that I'm going to talk about is getting a lot of traction right now. It's not a new game type of any means, but it is starting to become a little bit more popular, and that is the asymmetrical board game type. So my example for that this time around is going to be this game, Vast. It was Vast, the Crystal Caverns. This was extremely popular back in a couple years ago at Gen Con. It was really difficult to get, selling out pretty often each day in Gen Con, and it's a fun game. I haven't played it nearly as much as I should have, um, but we'll talk about asymmetrical board games. So the concept of asymmetrical board game is that the turn structure for every player that's playing is similar in that you have a certain section of things that you can do generally. The thing with asymmetrical board games is that everybody plays the board game a different way. Each player of the board game has a different goal that they're trying to accomplish instead of everybody trying to go after the same goal, and whoever does it better or the best wins or is the winner of that board game. In asymmetrical board games, each player has their own specific goal and their own specific end game trigger. So in my example, Vast here, you have the knight, you have goblins, you have a dragon, you have a bunch of different rules that you can take on. The dragon's goal is to, I want to say, kill or wake up and leave the cave. The knight's goal is to slay the dragon. The goblins are trying to steal crystals. So each role has their different end game that they're trying to accomplish that will activate the game end, and whoever activates the game end first wins. So there's not like a point total, uh, or like how European style games are victory points or anything like that. There is a specific goal that each person is going from, and each person has a different goal. This is this is my current example of an asymmetrical war game. It's probably the most baseline asymmetrical board game I have right now. I know, I want to say like a year, not last year Gen Con, but 2019 Gen Con. I want to say Root was a big asymmetrical board game to come out around then. That's another good one where each faction, the squirrels, the birds, things like that, they have their they each play differently. But in that one, each faction plays differently, but everybody's working towards a end game condition that is the same. So that's a little bit different. So you can get into variations of asymmetrical board games like that. But the baseline of an asymmetrical board game is that each player plays different than other players. Everybody has their own unique abilities and traits and things like that. I'm a big fan of asymmetrical board games. I think they can be really fun, and they add a lot of variety to the game. You know, because you can spend some time really learning how one role plays, and then switch it up, and it will be like a whole different game because you have different goals and different things to do. So it's definitely a fun one. Um, I would say Vast. I would put Vast personally as medium. The game itself is not super difficult. It's definitely harder than your standard Risk, Monopoly, or like Gravwell in my first video. So the game itself is not too difficult. The concept of asymmetrical, where you're two people or three people or four people and everybody's going after a different goal, that concept can get difficult to pay attention to, but the actual learning of what your role does is not that hard. So I will give that an orange medium difficulty for that for Vast, and generally speaking, you'd probably be looking at orange medium difficulty or higher for most asymmetrical games because they're not super easy, but there's a lot to pay attention to. All right. And the next game types that I'm going to get into, personally, is one of my favorite game types at the moment. I definitely have a lot. I don't. It's hard to say a lot in my collection, but I do have quite a few of these, and I do tend to gravitate towards these types of games right now, just because they're easy, they're fun, and you don't have to do a lot of thinking generally, and that is dexterity-based board games. So dexterity-based board games, and my example for that one today is going to be this awesome, beautifully designed box game here called Flip Ships. Flip Ships. Definitely messed that up a few times. Dexterity-based board games are anything related where the base object of the game relates to dexterity movements, whether you're building something, putting like pieces, stacking pieces on top of each other, building something, flicking something, um, flicking dice, whether it be anything like that. So it's dexterous in the fact that you're actually using your fingers and your hands, and that the game revolves around that more so than in-game stats, numbers, health, diet, strategy, resource placement, things like that. So dexterity-based games, it's more about your skill as a physical person, more so than your skill as a character in the game. So my example here, Flip Ships, I got that a few years ago at Gen Con, and it's the premise of the game is your aliens are attacking your planet, and it's a lot like a board game version of Space Invaders. So you put out this long board, you got these little discs, cardboard discs, weighted cardboard discs that you have, and each player picks a different um, color ship, and each ship has a different special ability. And you put them on a little thing, and you flick the ships up in the air, and wherever they fall, if they land on an enemy alien spaceship, you shoot it, you do damage to it, you blow it up, things like that. You flick the disc up in the air, and it lands somewhere, and your goal is to destroy all the aliens before they get to you. So it's a very basic dexterity-based game. Um, I'm gonna give it green, easy. We definitely don't win super often. The game itself is the object of playing the game is easy. Actually, winning against the game, that all depends on how good you are and how good the rest of your friends or family are that are playing with you at dexterity-based games. So, it's all up to you. It's not up to dice rolls. It's not up to anything like that. It's just how well you can inflict ships in the air. So there's a lot of other dexterity-based games. There's one called Flick 'em Up. That's a Western type of game that involves, depending on which one you get, either plastic or wooden discs that you flick and slide across your table, trying to hit other things. It's like cowboys and outlaws, and you're shooting little wooden discs at each other, trying to knock each other's people over to do damage. That one's a lot of fun as well. I would have used that as my example one, but it's way up here. I got the wooden box of it. It's wooden pieces, but it is a lot of fun. There's some other ones. There's there's dice dexterity games where you're flicking dice at other dice, trying to knock down towers or push a king dice out of a certain bounding box, things like that. But they all dexterity-based games revolve around your ability as a person to do something physical. And personally that's kind of why I like them. They're really good, even playing generally. Like if somebody's extremely good at strategy games like chess, Risk, things like that, generally speaking, you're at the same playing level as them when you talk about dexterity-based games, just because it's not really like a honed skill. You don't come out of the world thinking like, hey, I know how to flick a die across a foam mat and hit this other die. Like that's not generally a skill that you would have just sitting behind you and like ready to whip out. Unless you played a lot of marbles as a kid, then you might be pretty good. But generally speaking, everybody is on an even playing field, as long as physically you're both normal people. But so that's why I like them, and they're definitely good, and I would definitely consider all of them on the easy end of the spectrum. Um, and so those are dexterity-based games. All right, so the next game type that we're going to get into this right now, and I don't have a lot of examples for this game type, is something I need to get more into, because it is probably one of the biggest game types out there right now. It was even at the start of when games were being given game types, like instead of just like, here's a game, this is how it plays, do you like it? That is deck builders. Deck builders, or what I would most likely reference them to is just builders in general. That's whether that's dice builders or deck builders. Um, in my example that I have, just this tiny little game right here, Abandon All Artichokes, and this is a deck builder. Very small, very fun, very super easy game. This is like my first deck builder type of game. It is super introductory to deck building, and personally, it's why I really like it. Not only is it a good introductory to higher level and higher up games, in my opinion, as far as like pulling somebody out of Monopoly in life, but it is such an easy introduction to deck building. So, deck building, the way that works is you start with a small deck of cards. Generally, everybody starts with the same deck of cards. You'll have like a small amount of a few different types of cards, and each turn consists of you using those cards to acquire more cards from some kind of central marketplace or central area of the board, or not board, most situations, but in the center of the table. You'll use your cards to acquire better cards from the center of the table. Those cards will then all get put into a discard pile, which then, when you run out of your draw deck, you shuffle them all up. So all those new cards that you've been acquiring, those better cards, they get shuffled back in, and you slowly draw them into your hands. And then you use those better cards and your base cards, and you slowly get more better cards, or even more of those better cards, or even higher better cards, for the entire goal of, depending on if it's like a European style game or whatnot, your goal is to get the most victory points by the time the end game is triggered. Or it could be there are like co-op deck builders, like the Legendary series, where you're playing superheroes, and you're trying to get your superhero deck built up so that you can take down villains like the Red Skull, things like that. Games like Ascension deck builder, where you're trying to build your deck so you can kill these demons and things that are coming out. And the more of those that you kill, the higher your score is. And then whoever has the highest score towards the end, things like that. So, but the basic premise of a deck building game is you start with a base deck that you draw a hand from. You use those cards, and you acquire more cards. And once you get more of those cards that have better values in them, you use those to get even more cards. Um, and so on and so forth until the end of the game is triggered, and whoever wins, or the victory condition is co-op, things like that, then it is what it is. But this deck building, dice building thing, really, the biggest one that you'll hear when it comes to deck building is Dominion. Dominion is huge. There is the base game. There's, I don't even know how many expansions now. I remember when I used to play a lot with my friends, they had 5, 6, maybe even 7 expansions by that time, and that was years ago. Dominion is probably the biggest name in deck building. But there's other ones too. Dice. I have a game, Dice Forge. It is a dice builder, and that is you roll dice to get resources to acquire upgrades to your dice, and you actually pop the sides of the dice off and put the upgraded sides on it, so that way the next time you roll, you have a chance to roll that side of the upgraded dice. Another dice builder is Quarriors. I've had that forever, so much so that it's somewhere back there. The box is weather beaten, sun beaten, because it was in my car. And Quarriors is a dice building game. So you start with a set amount of dice in a bag. You draw a few of them out. You roll them. You use those dice to acquire new dice from the center, and then all those dice get put eventually back into this cloth bag you have. You shake it up, and you draw those dice out, and eventually you start drawing the bigger and the better dice. And you use those dice to damage your opponent, score victory points, and win the game. So dice building, deck building. I'm going to say that's easy to medium. Easy to medium. Somewhere in between the two. We'll go flash it a little bit. Depending on the game. Abandoned All Artichokes here is probably one of the easier games I even own. And it is the easiest deck building game I've personally ever played. But it is good. It's such a good one to get to get somebody into that mindset to think how to build a deck. If you've ever played drafting in Magic the Gathering, you've already done deck building in a sense. There are draft style games out there that are kind of different than deck building, but the basic concept is the same. You start with something and you build up from there. So that's deck building. It is a really good game type. Generally, it's pretty fast paced. Everybody, there's not a lot, there's not too much to go on in your one turn generally. I know in Dominion you can get up to the point where you're comboing this, that, comboing that, drawing more cards in the middle of your turn, combo stuff like that. It can get crazy, or it can be pretty calm and chill. It just depends on how that game is going. So that is deck building or building in general. I do like them a lot. I want to get Dominion eventually. I just haven't got around to it. All right, so let's get right into another one. So this one is also another one that has maintained a decent amount of popularity over the last few years, and that is co-op, you versus the board game. Slight variations sometimes could be like you versus one player, so it'll be like 3 players versus 1, where with one person playing the enemy. This extends even into video games nowadays, where it's you versus all like Dead by Daylight, things like that. I'm going to focus more on co-op right now, like just co-op you versus the board game. My example for this is The Captain is Dead. Probably one of the most played board games I currently have. I've played this board game with my friends a ton, and we've won some, but we've lost most of them. And the basic idea is everybody picks a role together, and you jump in there, and usually is one victory condition for you and your group to win with. And generally speaking, there is anywhere between 2 to 5 lose conditions. So it's much easier to lose than it is to win. But you work together. So if somebody is new to board games, it's a good one to toss them into that. Just because you can take over some of the stuff. You definitely you don't want to bring somebody that's too new, because then it's basically like you're just going to be playing by yourself. Or you'll get those people who will kind of run a lot of it using other players' things. Like they'll think about what that player can do while they're making their own turn. Sometimes one of those leader type players can be really good, but sometimes they can just like take over the whole thing. That is definitely something I tend to do as I've played so many board games, especially if it's a newer person or somebody I'm trying to introduce to board games. I do have a tendency to say, here, do this, do that, do this, do that. That's your turn. Okay, now it's my turn. So you got to watch out for that a little bit when you play co-op games. I am trying to consciously back up a little bit, because even though somebody is new to board games, they're not new, generally speaking, to teamwork. If they know what the goal is and they know what basically they can do on their turn, it's always good sometimes to let some fresh eyes, like they might see something from a different perspective than you would as somebody who's been playing board games, and they'll see it from a different way. So it's definitely, but they're always like fun. Co-op games generally are good fun. You don't really have to worry too much if somebody, is like gets heated or a sore loser if their game isn't going well for them, as you would in competitive games. Everybody can kind of relax a little bit. Even though this game, The Captain is Dead, really just puts you through the ringer, it is very hard to win this game unless you specifically pick certain roles. You put it on the easiest setting, things like that. And if you play it as it's meant to be played, where everybody gets a random role and you do with that what you can, it is a lot of fun, but it is very hard. In these co-op games, There's quite a lot of them. Pandemic was a big one for a while too. It has a lot of different flavors, a lot of different types. Even you have your base pandemic game trying to cure 4 diseases around the world before too many outbreaks and things happen. You got like an easier pandemic to cure dice game that's easier to set up, easier to play through, a little bit quicker, more randomness in the dice game. You got and there's a lot of co-op games, and even getting into some Arkham Horror was a big co-op game. I think it's on the third edition now, and that's you versus those Lovecraftian gods. It's huge. The one I played was like second edition. It was huge. It was a giant board, pieces and tokens everywhere. It's one of those things where you brought it out there, and if somebody was new to gaming and you dropped that on the table, they would probably run out of your house screaming because there's just so much going on. Um, Captain's Dead, not so much. I would say medium, medium for the Captain is Dead. It's really not a difficult game to learn. It is, but it is complex in how you approach it. So I'll give it medium. The actual ability to win the game is definitely hard. It was definitely in the red. It's way up there and hard. Don't expect to win your first few playthroughs unless you get really lucky. But co-op is just an amazing game type. It really is such a good one to throw in to call like just like have a chill environment where everybody's helping each other. Nobody is out looking to get somebody, anything like that. And then you either all win together or you all lose together. So definitely check out co-op games. There's so many of them out there. I'm sure there's something for any gaming group. And they are just a lot of fun when you're looking for something more chill than just going at each other's throats all the time. So I definitely recommend co-op games. And going right from co-op games, I feel that it just makes sense, really, to go into semi-co-op, but really aggressive, and that is Saboteur deception style games. My example for this is the Resistance. There's a lot of more well-known examples, I'm sure, and I even have some of my own. You got One Night Werewolf, just the regular werewolf series. You got Mafia, you got Coup, you got lots of different things that are deception style. I have a Battlestar Galactica board game based off of the Battlestar Galactica sci-fi series where some people are Cylons and you have to pretend not to be a Cylon while you're playing a board game and pretending to do tasks and jobs as a human, or you actually are doing them and you think the humans are going to win. In this Resistance, you have your evil corporations, and then you have your resistance fighters. Nobody knows who each other are. You know what your actual role is, and then it's your goal to help your team, whether it's Corp or resistance fighters, win the game. But you have to do that without letting anybody know necessarily who you are, because nobody can be trusted. You can say whatever role you want. Whether people believe you, that's a whole different thing. And then in this one, you go on 5 missions. Whoever wins 3 of those missions out of the 5, that group wins. The thing with any kind of deception style game, saboteur style game, generally speaking, the least amount of people you can have with those is 3. And even then, I would generally not recommend any saboteur deception style games with only 3 people. You really want to look at that 4 to 5 person or even higher. I have a game called Speakeasy. It's a deception style Prohibition era themed game where you have the federal agents and you got like rum running mafia, and you all get into a room. You have cards that tell you your secret code words for your group and passwords and things like that. And you walk around and you just talk to each other. You just have normal conversations and then try to slip in your passwords like fish or bucket or something like that into normal conversation to figure out who the other FBI agents are or who your other uh, mafia bootleggers are, things like that. That game needs 10 people. That is the minimum amount of people that you can play with that game, as far as I remember reading. I've never actually played that game. I've had it probably 4, 5 years. Probably 4 years. Never played it. It was really hard. It was really difficult to get 10 people together, especially now, obviously. Resistance here, it is 5 to 10 players. So you need 5 people just to play Resistance. If you can get those people together, and I know things like Tabletop Simulator have really boosted that up, they are amazingly fun games if you have the right group of people. They're all people you know in real life, a lot of friends, things like that. They can be some of the best game times you'll ever have because that the element of deception where you're pretending to be something you're not, trying to convince people, it's just a lot of fun. And you've seen, and in board games versions, there's so many different types of them and different things, like I said. And it's really bled a lot into video games as well. You like Project Winter, Among Us, way back in Gary's Mod, Trouble in Terrorist Town, things like that. Um, there's even werewolf video games now where it's based off the card game Werewolf, where you have a secret role, you're either a villager or a werewolf. Everybody goes to bed at night, somebody dies, you have to figure out who the werewolf is. It's really big in video games right now, and there are a lot of good board game and card games for that. So if you like Among Us, you like those things like that, you want to bring it out into the real world with some of your friends and family once it's safe and able to do so, check those out. They're really great. They'll leave this thing up as medium difficulty because they are difficult. Where in the original werewolf game, you're just handed a card and it says villager, werewolf, or I think it says one person is a seer, and you're really not told anything else about that. Like there's no rules to the game besides you have to go close your eyes when they do the night phase. That's about it. So when it gets up there, you're literally just a bunch of people hanging out and talking, and you're trying to figure out who the werewolf is. So it can definitely lead to like some blank stares, lulls of conversation. Like there's a skill to be learned for figuring that stuff out. Um, Another great example of that in a big party game is called Two Rooms in a Boom that has so many different variations, so many different roles in it. I think it plays up to like 30 people or something like that. It plays a ridiculous amount of people. Uh, and yeah, so that's deception style games. Depending on how many players you are able to get is really depending on how much fun you're going to have and which ones you can play. The Battlestar Galactica board game, if you check that out, that one I believe starts at 3 players. I have played it with 3 players. It's not the worst because of how many different elements that they added to the board game itself. It definitely plays better with 4 to 5, but it can definitely be done with 3. So, if you like I said, if you like Among Us, things like that, you want to get it in the physical world, check out any of those deception style werewolf mafia games. They're really good. All right, a super quick, easy one that we'll talk about now. I only have a couple of examples of this one. I want to get more because it is also one of my favorite types of games that you'll hear about, called Push Your Luck. This one right here, Zombie Dice. Push Your Luck games are as you would guess. You continue doing something you try to get, definitely an easy one, you continue doing something to try to get as many points as you can on your turn, or as many as something on your turn as you can. The or per round. The downside to it is there is an element of you are going to bust. You know, it goes all the way back to the game blackjack. Your goal is to get as close as you can to 21 without going over. That is a push your luck game. The harder you push, the higher the reward, the higher the risk. Zombie dice in my example, you have a set of dice, you roll 3 at a time. If you roll brains, you get points. If you roll shotgun blasts, you get closer to death. You can continue rolling and 3 dice at a time, collecting as many brains as you want on your turn until the point where you receive 3 shotgun blasts. As soon as you have 3 shotgun blasts, your turn ends and you lose any brains that you might have had collecting. Now you can stop at any time. If you have 2 or 3 brains, decide that's enough, you can say I'm done, take your 2 or 3 points, pass the dice along to the next player, and they'll go, and those brains, those points that you have acquired now can't be taken from you, generally speaking. So, but you can keep rolling and rolling and rolling and get, 9, 10 brains in one turn. But as soon as you get 3 shotguns, your turn ends, and you lose all the brains that brain points that you're working on that turn. So there's a lot of different types of push your luck games. Some of them you grab from a cloth bag. Some of them things like that. The big other push your luck game I have is a game called Quartz. It's about dwarven miners, and you reach into a bag and you pull out these real fun, cool looking colored plastic crystals. And the bag goes around and everybody keeps drawing until everybody leaves the mine voluntarily or everybody gets kicked out, except for one player, by mining 2 obsidian. I'm using zombie dice as my example of a push your luck game because it is very simple, super easy to play. It's great. It can travel. You can bring it to anywhere once it's safe to do so. I've played it, hanging out at a restaurant or coffee shop or anything like that. Just hanging out. You can just take it out. There's no setup really. You just roll dice. It's a lot of fun and it's extremely easy. Quartz is probably one of my favorite games at the moment. It is a push your luck game. It is also near impossible to find. For whatever reason, they don't make it. They stopped making it after they sold it to be rethemed a couple times. There is the original Quartz. There's a Disney Seven Dwarfs and Princess themed Quartz, and then I think the most recent one that uses the same kind of push your luck system was a Friday the 13th horror style themed one. But the actual Quartz and the Disney Princess Seven Dwarfs one are near impossible to find, and they're going for like $100, $150 on eBay. But other than that, so that's why I'm using zombie dice as my example for push your luck games. I don't have a lot of them that I could think of either, but I do definitely would like more. So if you do know any push your luck style games and you're watching this, go ahead and leave a comment on this YouTube video and let me know of some other push your luck games because I'm definitely interested in finding more of those. All right, and we are getting towards the end of my examples. It's going to be a pretty long video of game types. The next one that I want to talk about is another game type that is more of a subtype that is being attached to a lot of board games right now. And if you are anywhere near or in the board game renaissance, if some people are calling it, or this era of board games that we're in, you've most likely heard this, and it is called Legacy. Legacy style board games are wild because you destroy the board game as you play it, in various ways. For my example right here, we are going to be talking about Charterstone. Charterstone is my example of a legacy game, because I don't actually own any full-fledged legacy games at the moment. I think they're wild. I understand the concept of it. I think it is very interesting. I don't want to spend the price of a board game, which is upwards between $60 to $80 for a board game, and only be able to play it 12, 13, 14 times because you're ripping pieces up, doing things like that. A lot of legacy games, once you get done playing through the campaign, the story, the season, whatever, there's a lot of them that you can't play that anymore. Charterstone is a legacy light game. Once you get done playing the 12 sessions or 10 or 12 sessions, I forget, of the legacy build-up of Charterstone, the game then becomes a worker resource placement game that you can play an unlimited amount of times. What makes Charterstone interesting and the legacy aspects of Charterstone is there are certain decisions you make in each of the initial sessions where you add stickers to your board, you add stickers of rules to the rule book, you change rules in the rule book, you place stickers over previous rules, things like that, so that way when you get to the end and you have this worker placement game at the end, it's going to be it could be completely different from somebody else that played and owned Charterstone, depending on how they did their initial sessions. So there's a lot of stuff that can change, a lot of new cards that get added in Charterstone as you're playing and things like that that might be different than other players. I think that's what really interests me about Charterstone is you have that feeling of legacy, but you still have a game that you can play a bunch of times after it's done. One of the bigger ones for Legacy was Risk Legacy, and as far as I know, I do not own Risk Legacy. I had the opportunity to play it a few times with one of my friends. It's a lot of fun. It's just it's your standard Risk style, but you make changes as you go. There are cards you rip in half sometimes. There are pouches of stuff that you open depending on certain events and things like that, all the way to the point where you can destroy and damage cities. So if they have either a permanent -1 to any army that's sitting in that city, or a permanent +1 if you bolster their defenses. In one of our game sessions of Risk Legacy, we nuked India. At that point, the game instructs you to place a radioactive sticker on India, and India starts spawning a radiation poison army that just attacks at random. So things like that are what you can expect from legacy games. They can get wild. They're a lot of fun, and it's a really big thing coming on to the scene right now. It was a big thing. It's still pretty popular, but I do believe that Legacy Light style is starting to take a little bit more of a hold on it. Not as many people are doing just straight Legacy games. Pandemic, a co-op game, they have a few Legacy seasons where you play through the season, and I want to say the newest one, when you get done, you can replay it. I want to say like seasons 1 and 2 or something like that. I want to say once you got done playing through that season, you either saved the world kind of thing or your world fell apart. I don't know for sure, but you can expect that. So if you start looking into legacy games, you want to make sure you read them, see if you're going to be able to play that game after it's done or not. If not, if that's what you're looking for, is a game like that you play 12 sessions and at the end of it, you get like a final score, how you handled that legacy series of sessions, all for it. I think the idea intrigues me. Definitely going to give that a medium at least. Yeah, so that's the thing that's out there. If you want that it really goes to that, like where those decisions. If you want a board game with decisions that really, really matter, when they tell you to rip a card in half, you have to be ready to rip that card in half. So you can check out lots of games. there's quite a lot of legacy style games coming that are out, that are coming out. It's a what I said, it's like a subgenre. So you can have strategy games like Risk that are legacy. You can have co-op games, Pandemic, that are legacy. You have Charterstone, which isn't, well, we're not going to talk about worker placement resources type of things right now. I don't have a lot of those games, but this is legacy light and there's worker placement. So legacy is more of like a subtype that kind of gets added to let you know there's going to be a lot of changes to this board game as you play it. Permanent stuff happens. Decisions really matter. So it can be very exciting to play those. All right, last on my list of stuff to talk about um, is going to be another builder style. I kind of generally keep this separate from like deck building, dice building, things like that, because it's kind of just referenced in a different way. And it is engine. Uh, my example for this is Wingspan. This boy is big. It's a big box. Wingspan. This is a beautiful, beautiful game. Beautiful artwork. And it is an engine building game. The full thing, the full thing that people reference is engine building. A lot of people will just shorten it sometimes to engine game, things like that. It has a similar feel to deck building. Sometimes you'll have like a deck building engine game, depending on what you're looking at, things like that. The concept of engine building is that you start with base actions. So we'll use Wingspan as it's my current favorite engine building games. One of my probably top 3 games right now to play because it is just a lot of fun, gorgeous artwork, and I love birds. So Wingspan, you start with a portfolio, like a little mat that shows you your different habitats. So you got like a forest habitat, you got fields habitat, and you got a fish river habitat. And you acquire birds, you release them into your habitats, and then these birds let you do actions. And these actions will combo upon other birds in your habitats, which will then combo actions. So at the start of it, you activate one action, and it might just be to draw a card. But as you build your engine of birds, halfway through the game, mid-game, things like that, you have a lot more birds hanging out and a lot more bird actions. That one action that you perform could activate 3 or 4 other birds. So instead of just drawing that one card, like you did at the beginning of the game, towards the mid to end game, when you do that one, activate that one action, you could draw 4 or 5 cards. And while you're drawing those 4 or 5 cards, you could be discarding them or doing other things with them depending on the combos. So you start with one action doing generally one thing, to the point where when you build this engine up, one action does 12 different things. So, and that's the concept of engine building, is that generally speaking, on your turn, you will take one action. But depending on where you are in that game, whether it's beginning, mid, or end game, that one action will carry drastically different amounts of weight. So, like in this Wingspan, if you get 3 or 4 birds. So in the forest habitat, that's where you get most of your food in Wingspan, and you need food to feed and get more birds. So at the start of it, one action in that gets you 1 piece of food. But by the time you're in the mid to late game, you got birds hanging out in the forest, one action of that can get you, 5 or 6 pieces of food. It can get you, food for other birds. It can, activate birds in the other habitats. Like it built up from there. And there's a lot of different types of engine building games, and there's a lot of different ways that they're handled. But the basic concept of engine building is that the weight of your action slowly increases as you play. to the point where you're just doing an obnoxious amount of things with that one action. The other it's somewhere over there. Can't see it on here, but there's another engine building game that I like a lot, and that is Gizmos. And that's when you slowly build up gizmos to the point where like this gizmo activates this other gizmo, and you collect different types of energy, and it's that's why I say like when you get really down to it, it's the same concept as Wingspan, except instead of birds you have gizmos. But your one action that you perform combos up and does a bunch of chain reactions, and that's what an engine building game is about. So Wingspan, it's an amazing game. If you love birds, if you love artwork like that, it's a beautiful game. It's definitely one of my top games. Top 3 right now, could be top of all time. We have 2 expansions to it. We have the European and the Oceania expansion on it that added a bunch of new stuff and a bunch of new awesome birds. So, alright, thank you so much for checking out. This was the second episode of Grim Reviews. I know it's a little different. I wanted to do this because it's going to help. I can reference this episode now whenever I start talking about game types, whenever I mention builder, whenever I mention, engine, if I reference co-op, if I reference Saboteur, asymmetrical, things like that, I can reference this video as well for some of those. And I'll probably do another video like this and talk about some of the other game types that I didn't touch on now, because there is quite a few others that are out there, and there's sure to come up more. And that's one of the things I want to do with Grim Reviews as well. I'm not going to just do a board game each time, but I'm going to talk about board games in general, and maybe even expand outside of board games a little bit, just to give you my opinions on, what I play, things like that. We're doing board games right now because I love board games. I have a lot of them, and there's not a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of people doing board game reviews, things like that. But I want to take them to like a different direction, and kind of just tell you based on my experience of the amount of hours I've played in board games, what the actual recommended play people for, and things like that, and whether the lower player variants are worth it, or anything like that. So I really want to let people know what they're getting into when they get into certain board games, or when they get into certain board game types. If they're looking, for more board games of a certain type, like more asymmetrical board games, more dexterity board games, anything like that. So I want to cover a lot of that and just talk about board games in general. That way it's not one board game each time, but we can slowly expand your knowledge, and you can start looking for board game types and things like that to increase your library, if you're looking to increase your library, or if you're looking to talk more or know more about what some of your friends that are more into board games are talking about. You'll have more of an idea now. So thank you so much for joining me for episode 2 of Grim Reviews. If you like this kind of comment, like this video, subscribe, follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitch, where I will, if you play games there, and sometimes I'll talk about board games and things in there too, maybe. But I'm on Twitch. I do stream lots of different games, a variety of games. It's really hard for me to stick to one game. And follow me on social media if you want to see what I'm currently playing before it gets on to Grim Reviews, or before when I haven't had a chance to really talk about it yet. So I'm Grim Method on all my socials. Check it out. My Instagram is full of board game pictures and things like that. And if you have any recommendations, especially this episode, when I talked about board game types, if you have any recommendations for any of the specific types of board games that I talked about in this video, especially Push Your Luck. I'm looking for more push your luck recommendations, more dexterity-based game recommendations. I do have quite a few already, but I was always check more of those out. Asymmetrical co-op. Always looking for more co-op games. I love to play those a lot, and those are best in my opinion as far as getting new people into them. And let me see, legacy games. You want to toss some legacy game ideas towards me? I prefer ones that don't end after after you're done with your sessions. Ones that you can keep playing the game afterwards. But I would always take a look at other ones. Thank you so much again. This is episode 2 of Grim Reviews. Happy playing out there. All right.